do I do the? Ooh.
Yeah, you do it.
Hi, I'm Aisha, and I'm quite honored and really excited today to be in conversation with screenwriter Mary Kate O'Flanagan, and I'm super excited to get all the industry tips and tricks from her. And yeah, so I guess we can start right away. So, Mary Kate, I suppose like with the whole like pandemic and everything,
Mhm.
what's it been like being a writer who's kind of like in constant isolation now? Like how is that like fed into like your work, or like how it affects your work?
Well, I mean, I think most writers are like really grateful. It's lovely to be here, by the way, and thank you for having me, and thank you to the festival for having me. I think most writers are really grateful that a lot of life chores have fallen away and that they have more time to just write. I mean, obviously, that depends on what your situation is at home, but a lot of people feel grateful that they have that. Most writers crave solitude. You know, Virginia Woolf calls it a room of one's own that's absolutely necessary to creativity and to the time to ruminate. So that's really helpful. But one of the things I love about writing for film and television, as opposed to writing a novel or poetry, is that it is collaborative. And I have found it's very challenging to collaborate over Zoom, although it's not impossible. It's so much more fun to be in the room with people, you know, and it's just much easier to be able to, of course, you can read people's expressions on the camera, but there's an atmosphere in the room where you can read people. You know, they say that something like 95% of communication is nonverbal. In other words, it's just all those little ticks and micro expressions that you can miss, and definitely on the phone that you can miss. So that part of it is a challenge, but we are very lucky that we've got the technology that makes it possible to continue to write and collaborate.
Mm. So I suppose for like young writers at home at the moment who could be struggling to kind of keep up like the discipline of writing, because writing is like is such a skill to have, and it's so important to like develop it as a young person if you want to go into screenwriting especially. So would
Mhm.
you have any tips for like kind of like keeping up that discipline and kind of like how to improve on like being able to like write every day?
Well, I think the first thing is you're 100% right. It's really difficult to motivate yourself when you're in isolation. And, you know, most people talk about having, you know, half a novel in a drawer. I suppose that's very old fashioned. Nobody prints their work out anymore. But, you know, a bit of a novel, or, you know, the beginning of a short story, or some thoughts they've been noodling with. But it's hard to put shape on those. I think that writing competitions are really great for just that. So, you know, you can, and I would really recommend to any young person who wants to be a screenwriter that they should be a member of their local guild, which in Ireland is the WGI, the Writers Guild of Ireland. And I believe that to be a member when you're not yet earning money from writing is very, very inexpensive. I mean, if you're earning at a certain level, I think my fees this year were like €200, something in around that. So well worth it, because the Writers Guild of Ireland sends out a newsletter regularly that tells you about all the opportunities that are coming up. But there's no reason for you to limit yourself to those. Like, if you are a storyteller, you're a storyteller in every medium. So there was an agency in London, I forgot their name, Curtis Brown, that had a competition. The deadline was in January, so you could be working on it. I entered it over Christmas and New Year. I think they were quite cleverly made the deadline January 15th. So it was like, if you were going to take a break for your celebrations or to be with your family, you still had a couple of weeks after the 1st of January to get in. And they were looking for a short outline, like a page, and the first three chapters, let's say, of a book. So just for fun, I don't believe for a minute that I'm going to win it, but it gave me something to focus upon. So the deadline of a competition is great. I will say this just as a caveat: there are lots and lots and lots of screenwriting competitions that are quite expensive to enter.
Yeah.
And I discourage people from entering those. I think the entry fee for a screenwriting competition should be very inexpensive, but that's the first thing, is to look for competitions and remember you're a storyteller. So, enter a short story competition. Poetry is not the same medium, but you can enter a short story competition or like that, first three chapters of a novel and a very broad outline. That's a good thing to do. And another great thing to do is to join a writing group. So just, have a thing that you all meet at an agreed time, whether it's Saturday morning or Thursday afternoon, it doesn't matter, but you meet once a week and you share your writing with each other. And there are like thousands of things you can find online where you can find a little writing assignment and you can all do it. Um, that does need to be moderated very carefully,
Yeah.
because sometimes, you know, egos get involved and egos get bruised. And ego is a good thing to have as a writer, to believe in yourself that you've got something interesting to say, but it can also be very hurtful if somebody gives you negative feedback. Especially if it's the person leading the group, and I have heard of those things happening. So, you might look at, well, how are you going to moderate that you don't give each other negative feedback? You ask each other questions about a story is probably a good way of giving feedback, like, looking for more clarity, like, why did the character do that, or where was she when that scene happened, things like that. And of course, there's like lots and lots of online courses, and some of those are interactive. Like, I give online courses. I limit my class numbers to 10, but I give online courses where you've got an assignment every week and then you build, from that. So that's something else to do. I think, sorry, this very long answer. But I think the other thing is to be modest with your ambitions in the beginning. Like, I sometimes meet people before the pandemic who would be like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to write 12 hours a day and I'm going to, write my opus magnum. And most of those people burn out, and then get super stressed because they quit their job and don't have any money. So I think it's better to say to yourself, I'm going to write like 10 hours a week,
Yeah.
and like 3 of those hours at least will be one block,
Hmm.
because there is, as you will know, like, it it takes a little time to fall into the creative state of mind. So if you're always writing in 1 hour blocks, for me, and this is, everyone's different, it takes me about 40 minutes before I'm in that creative state of mind. So if I am always writing in 1 hour blocks, I'm actually only getting 20 minutes of flow in each of those. So I would just go, well, try to write 10 hours a week, maybe even 10 is ambitious. Try to, I mean, when the courses that I offer, I always say it will be maximum 3 hours a week, besides your investment in the course time, which is 2 hours a week. So that's 5 hours a week. But if you are diligent about that, like, don't try to do too much, but give yourself realistic goals, and
Yeah.
then you'll have something. But working towards a goal for most people is helpful, so you can also be looking at, what are the funding deadlines in your country? Like, let's say it may or may not be Ireland. So I know Ireland the best, but I don't only work in Ireland. So you can look at the funding deadlines and go, oh, okay, let's just talk about Ireland, because probably a lot of our audience is from there. There's a Screen Ireland deadline for television ideas at the end of March. Then I want to look at what they're looking for, probably outlines. So it's not huge amounts of work. It's a huge amount of thinking, but they probably don't want you to have written a whole episode. I don't know, actually, you can look it up, but you would want to be bringing that to the producers of your choice kind of a month before, and then they're going to put the rest of the package together. But look at those deadlines and work to them. I think it's really motivating to have a goal in mind.
Yeah, no, that definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I'll probably have to put that one into practice myself. Another one that a lot of people always wonder about, like screenwriters especially, is like, what would you draw inspiration from when you're writing, from your own personal experience?
Well, my own personal experience is, quite different. I'm very attracted to almost all genres except for horror. I can't watch horror because I take cinema very seriously and I get really terrified. So I don't know that genre very well. And I think the people who really love it know it super well and are really immersed in it. But I've written action adventure, which I really love. I've written comedy. I've written a political thriller. Um, I never really quite know where inspiration comes from, but I sometimes co-write with a really gifted writer, Gavin Ryan, and what Gavin always says, and I think he's right, is ideas are two a penny. You're having ideas all day, every day. The work comes from, are you going to sit down and put some clothes on that idea, you know? So that is where you have to really just listen to what makes your heart beat, you know. Um, I realized after some time that I'm quite attracted to true life stories, but I don't always want to tell them exactly as they happened. So, it would, rather than saying based on a real story, I think it would be more, truthful in my career to say inspired by a true story, but then my imagination's run off, But I'm writing something at the moment that's pure fantasy and imagination, and it's just, what if this happened? But an exercise that I do get people to do is to say, you could do it right now if you wanted. We could do a little demonstration
Mm.
for the viewers. What are your 5 desert island movies? So if you were going to be, I mean, more realistically, you're not going to be on a desert island, but if you're going to be home, kind of sick, you can't really work, but not too sick to watch TV, what are the 5 movies that you would choose to rewatch? And sometimes when I give people this exercise, people at home can do it too. They're like, "Oh, I'd watch all of Tarkovsky," and I'm like, "Oh, are they your favorite films?" And they're like, "No, but I've never seen them, but I want to see them." And I'm like, "No, no, that's not the purpose of this exercise. What we're trying to find out is what inspires you." And
Yeah.
so very often they're not the classiest movies, right? Like your list is often, and people are sometimes like, I'm so embarrassed. My list is like Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Snow White and the like, but it's absolutely fine. Whatever are your go-to movies are your go-to movies. And I would always say we don't love films because they're perfect. We love movies the way we love people, not because they're perfect, but because something in them chimes with something in us. So let's just see. Most people's, list is quite widespread, but what's yours?
Oh goodness, because I was thinking about it the minute you said it, I was like, what would be mine? Probably 13 going on 30 because I love that film and
I love that
like,
film. Okay.
I could watch it like over and over again. And
Well,
then
that's what we're looking for. What are the films that you have watched over and over again, right? Can you think of it? I mean, when someone asks me, especially on camera, I can't think of any movies at all. So it's okay if you can't.
um,
Um,
then Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, like
Brilliant.
I always know the ending, but like I cry anyway.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, like,
We
I
can watch
literally
films over and over again,
mm,
even though because we're not watching them to find out what's happening in the plot. We're watching them for the emotional experience that they're going to bring us on, right? So that's really interesting. Okay, so Romeo and Juliet on 13 going on 30.
probably Roger and Hammerstein's Cinderella, the one with Whitney Houston in it as well. That one's really fun.
I've never seen it.
It was recently put on Disney Plus. I'm like,
Oh.
I'm living my best life now that it's on Disney because like I forced my mom to watch it with me and sing all the songs. So I think that would be up on there, even though I'm
Okay,
20, but it'll definitely be up on there.
great. Okay.
Yeah, and then two more. Um oh goodness, I'm trying to think of two more. Then I really loved the animated Peter Pan as well. That was really fun, the Disney version again. Wow, I didn't
So
realize.
the one from like 50 years ago.
Yeah, that one.
Okay,
That was
great.
really fun. And
Mhm.
then my last one would probably be Probably Get Out. Yeah, that one's also quite like, I think that's so interesting. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I love that film. I think I saw that film like 3 or 4 times in the cinema before I watched it at home. You know, I was just really wrapped by it. Okay, so like very often it's difficult for people to do this on their own at home. So people can contact me and go, analyze my list, right? So yours are very light and bright. Okay. I mean, there's death and tragedy in Romeo and Juliet. But when we think of Romeo and Juliet, we think of it as like that, what Baz Luhrmann does, you know, those just cascade of colors and images and visuals coming at us, and how beautiful it is. They're all romantic. Okay, so like 13 going on 30 has a love story at the heart of it, but that's again like, why not? Like that's for most people it's the most important thing, and you know, none of us has it figured out, right? Like none of us has it figured out how to, you know, love someone and allow ourselves to be loved. We'll never get bored of those stories, right? Because there isn't an easy formula, there isn't an easy answer, right? So you've got that, but there's another theme that's emerging. So Cinderella, Romeo and Juliet to a lesser extent, but the theme is still there. 13 going on 30. What were the other ones?
Peter Pan and Get Out.
Peter Pan and Get Out. Okay, so Get Out's kind of the outlier in that, like in that it's not, you know, beautiful and colorful and romantic, and you know, I mean, literally one of those is a cartoon, right? You know, um, but here there is a theme of shape shifting. Okay, in all of your films, you know, so nobody is who. Well, in all of your films, there's somebody who's not who they appear to be. Okay,
Mhm,
in Cinderella, it's literally Cinderella. In
mhm,
Romeo and Juliet, there's a lot of disguise putting on and disguise
mhm,
taking off. And of course, the final tragedy, spoiler alert, is that, you know, she appears to be dead when she's not. And like there's been a confusion about getting the message. You know, 13 going on 30, of course, she's literally magically in another body. So that's something that's a theme that you probably return to over and over again. And you might feel like, you know, that you're, well, those films are quite eclectic, you know, a Disney film from an animated Disney film for kids in the 1950s, I think, or 60s. But again, yeah, Peter Pan and Wendy, like, you know, they're like there's transformation, they're magically transported to another place, right? So Peter Pan refusing the identity of a grown-up man. It's really interesting, right?
mhm,
So probably what you will keep coming back to, no matter what the story is on the outside, is about shape shifting.
mhm,
So, and it's really interesting in your list because you're interested in both sides of that coin.
mm,
You know, in Get Out, it's very sinister. It's like the other people are not who they appear to be. And not understanding that is putting him in danger. But in all the others, it's actually there is a magic in being able to take on another identity
mm,
and try on being a different person. But there are also dangers in all of that, you know. So I think that's just I think that's a really interesting theme, you know.
mm.
But I mean, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now, Aisha?
I'm 20 at the moment.
Okay, so not a girl, not yet a woman. No. But you know, you're at what we would call a liminal stage, what academics would call a liminal stage or a threshold stage in your life, right? So you're no longer your parents' child, but you're not an independent
Mm,
adult yet. So it's not surprising that those themes are interesting to you, but they probably have been interesting to you for a very long time, you know. And actually, my list is different to yours, but the theme is not dissimilar, you know. So my list is
really?
Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia is a massive, big epic, but the parts of it where I go, ooh, are the parts where you see he is in love with the romantic idea of himself, you know. Um, and then there's a little French film called Romuald et Juliette. It's very hard to find, but it is about um, well, it's about, yeah, it's about a very successful CEO of a company who's being undermined, and the only person he can turn to is the cleaning woman because she's invisible to everybody. But just before his life falls apart, she has said to him one night when she's vacuuming, she said, "You should be careful. Not everybody's trustworthy." And he thinks she's off her rocker until, sure enough, all the knives come out and his life falls apart and he has to go and find her. But it's about how she can move through the world unperceived because people think she's not important, because she's a woman of color and she's a cleaner, so there are just different themes that go through the things that I love. Broadcast news, and I love con artist movies, which are all about how you can manipulate the world around you depending on how you know how to manipulate appearances. So Catch Me If You Can is another one of my favorites. But I would advise everybody, like, if you're looking for, like, where can I find inspiration, to just go back to what do you watch over and over and over again. And then there are like thousands and thousands of stories that you come across every day, but you just go, ooh. And it's not, why is that interesting at first? It's, why is that interesting to me? And I find there are some stories where I just go, oh, why would she have done that? Or how would I feel, or how would I behave if I were in that position? And I think when you've got a story that's tugging at your imagination in that way, that's the one to go to.
No, definitely. Like those are just like, I'm still like thinking about the whole like aspect of like how like our favorite films, or not like necessarily favorite films that we go back to, can like inform our creativity. Because I never even like noticed that pattern, and you picked it out so easily, and I was like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. And just kind of like looking at what's around you, especially to draw inspiration from, to kind of like as a writer to like be observational and kind of like stay open as well, seems pretty important.
Yeah, but I think it's difficult for, like, somebody else had to look at my list and tell me what was in common with it because I couldn't see it. So I think, it's difficult to be in dialogue with your own subconscious because it is necessarily subconscious. But, I mean, this was one that was really interesting. My sister gave me a list of hers, and again, it wasn't necessarily the main theme in all of the films, but immediately I went, oh, there's something about family of origin. So, I don't remember all of the ones that were on the list, but Michael Clayton was one of them, which is a great thriller from about 12 years ago, I think, with George Clooney. And it's a kind of, corporate greed, what's really going on under the surface kind of a movie, but his family of origin is very present in it. And we see that he has become unmoored from them. Like, he's come from a family of cops, but he's become a hotshot lawyer. And it's not about that, but that's definitely pivotal in it, that he's become unmoored from them. And they're going to be, again, spoiler alert, he's going to need their help to get out of the trouble that he gets into. So that was just one that I observed, but it was interesting because my sister and I both come from a very tight-knit family. And she had never said this to me before, but she said, oh, that's so interesting. I was saying it's about separating from your family of origin. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's not, and often it's bittersweet. And my sister said, oh, and she said, when I was in boarding school, there was a girl who really tragically lost her second parent, so I can't remember what order it was in, but let's say her mother had already passed years before and her father died. And of course, it was terrible. Like, here's this young woman, 17 or 18. And of course, my sister never said this to her, but my sister said she did privately think that would open up so many possibilities. Not that she wished anyone ill, not that she wished her 5 sisters and her parents to die, but it caught her imagination in a way that it never would have caught mine. So, like, a theme that then has caught her, that is interesting in all of the films that she returns to again and again, is the theme of the values of your family of origin and your loyalty to your family of origin versus striking out in the world and being free and independent. So it's just an interesting exercise to do because you will probably find that if that theme is there, it's the story that's worth your investing your time in.
Yeah. So I suppose my next question would be like, as a woman in film and as a writer in particular, did you ever like come across any barriers when it came to writing because you're a woman?
You're not always aware of them. Like, somebody doesn't put a roadblock up and say no women here. I one thing that I've often found interesting is when I get a call and they say, we just think you'd be a good person for this job. I also work a lot as a story editor. So I come in when it's somebody else's story and I help them with the underlying structure of that story, and help them to, get it from whatever, outline to first draft or, third draft to sixth draft, more polished draft. So um, I'll often be a part of the creative process, even though I might not be driving it. But often people say, "Oh, we'd like to have you because we want a woman's voice." And
Mhm.
I always go, "Well, it's this woman's voice." Do you know what I mean? But I think it's interesting when people say that, as though a woman's voice is a thing. I've never heard somebody say, we're looking for a man's voice. Sometimes you hear somebody saying, like, if you're working with a female dominated team, it's very rare that it's an all female team and that you then go, but sometimes you go, well, let's run this by. We should get a male perspective on this, because our audience is both. But I really, really, really rarely hear that. But when I hear somebody saying we want a woman's voice, I think,
Yeah.
oh, I'll tell you actually, never meet your heroes. No, that's not fair to say. I'm not going to name check this person. But there's somebody whose work I really, really, really admire. And we brought him over to Ireland to talk to writers and aspiring writers. And he said, I have no women in my writing room because women can't write men. And he said they either write them too soft or they write a cartoon version of them where they're super tough, but they can't write men. Now he was saying I'm not happy about the lack of diversity in my writers' room, but I was just like, oh, oh. And this same person would have talked about having, taught British actors American accents, and I was like, well, teach them. Like if somebody's getting it wrong, um, but also, I mean, I hear men saying men would never talk like that. And I go, well, some men do, you don't. You know what I mean? But also, I was going, you have female characters.
Yeah.
Like, so men can write women, but women can't write men. That was the most kind of overt one. And it took me a long time to metabolize it because for good reason, really, really admire this person. And he's an amazing writer and his work is amazing. And he's actually great on racial diversity. And he's a person who has really, really strong ethics. But in front of a room that had a lot of younger women in it, he said women can't write men. And he just made that definitive, statement. And that was discouraging. But I would say the biggest roadblocks I've encountered have been in myself. You know, I think, and I can only speak for myself in this case. This is this woman's voice, not a woman's voice. That I tend to think I'm probably too small. I'm probably not good enough. Um, and I have a friend who works in business, and 20 years ago, she was, she's a really smart and able woman. So she was climbing the ladder of her big company, and she was sent on a day's talk by a woman whose name I can't remember, but she was the head of Pepsi Cola. So she was a massive CEO. I think this was more than 20 years ago. I think it was the 90s. And it was just for women in business. And the speaker said, hands up if you have imposter syndrome. Hands up if you think that you're not good enough, you're going to be found out, and you're going to be. And almost every woman put her hand up. And she said, okay, so let me just explain to you that, like, this seminar is £500. for the day, and your company thinks you're worth not only that investment, but they've given you a day off work to come to it. So they are investing in you. They think you really have a lot of potential. And she said, nearly every woman that I know is waiting to be found out and kicked out of her job. And she said, I promise you, your male counterparts cannot understand why they are not already running the company. So I think there is an encultured thing where women tend to doubt themselves and be apologetic. And by and large, although writers tend to be people who doubt themselves anyway, by and large, the men have more confidence. And therefore, it is our jobs to say, I'm willing to fail. I'm willing to put myself out there. I'm willing to, just keep trying. I'm willing to, I mean, this is a massive advantage as a woman in that if you want to write for film and television, you can't think that your first draft is the best.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be ready to take notes and you've got to be ready to rewrite. And that's where the, let's just call it typically feminine, I wonder if this is good enough, actually is helpful.
Yeah.
Because you will hear people going, like somebody will say to you, this isn't working, and da da da. And if you have the mindset of it could be better, then you will hear that and you'll make it better. And if you have the mindset of I'm a genius and it's just the world's job to find that out, then it won't get better. Now, listen, those attitudes are not entirely gendered. I meet women who are intransigent and I meet men who are open to learning and who doubt themselves. But there is, I can observe a pattern that it's more likely that young women especially will doubt themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the biggest obstacles are within us. And for people who are listening to this, this is the perfect time. It's the perfect time to be a young woman. It's actually the perfect time to be a woman of any age who has a story to tell, because the industry wants it. And it's not just that the industry wants it to tick a few boxes. It's actually because the industry is finally starting to realize that money could be made out of making more original stories, right? So you know what the Bechdel test is, right?
Yeah.
So do you want to tell the audience? I feel like I've been talking a lot. What the Bechdel test asks 3 questions of any film, right?
So it's like it asks whether a work would feature at least 2 women who talk to each other than something than a man. So
yeah, so the 3 questions as I understand them is like, are there at least 2 female characters like who have speaking parts, right? Whose names we get to know and they have speaking parts. So, the waitress in the diner, unless she's going to be important to the plot, doesn't count, right? So are there at least 2 female characters? It's amazing how many films fall down on just that. That doesn't necessarily mean they're bad films. Lawrence of Arabia, up there with my favorite films, right? No female speaking parts, but it's still a magnificent film and it's about the theatre of war. So we're not saying a film is bad if it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. So are there 2 women? And if there are at least 2 females, do they ever meet? And that question is just asking, are they there to be love interest for like our main hero and his buddy, or, is he torn between, 2 lovers or 17 lovers? So do they ever meet? In other words, do they exist on screen outside the remit? And then if they meet, do they talk about anything other than a man? So it's just asking, are there female characters who have independent lives, right? And I think something between 85 and 95% of films that are made in not just the West, but the Northern Hemisphere don't pass the Bechdel test on one level or another. And like I say, that does not mean that they do not have merit artistically. But what it means is that all stories haven't been told.
yeah.
Right? People like to say, oh, all stories have already been told. Not even close. Not even close. And the industry is starting to realize that, right? So you and I were talking just before we started about true grit, right? And how putting a 14-year-old girl, not as a victim, but driving the action in a Western makes that an extraordinarily fresh and interesting Western. I was thinking just ahead of our talking about, I was in the cinema with a really good friend of mine, Yasa Hardiman. She's a brilliant Irish filmmaker and television maker. And we were at a film, again, 20 years ago. I think it was the first time I saw Colin Farrell on the big screen. It was a film called Tigerland. And it's not a bad film, but Nyasa turned to me and went, "What an original idea. A film about the Vietnam War," right? And I turned back to her and I went, "But from the American perspective." And then we both laughed ourselves sick, right? But like, I have not yet seen a film about the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective. That may be my fault. Maybe I should be seeking those films out. But the only film that I've ever seen about the Vietnam War, for the like hundreds and hundreds of films that there have been made about it, that even featured a woman, was, oh, I forgot what it was called, but Michael J. Fox and Sean Penn. But the perspective was still when a woman was taken captive and used as a sex slave by some American soldiers, what a tragedy it was for the nice American soldier who didn't want to bear witness to that, So her suffering was still perceived through the lens of, now look, it was a start, I'm not saying that it was a pretty good film, and it was a film that needed to be made, but I still haven't seen war films from the perspective of women. What is it like? And that's not only because we don't put on uniforms by and large and pick up guns and get into the trenches. It's because we're not making the films, right? I mean, there is a very long engagement, which is, one person's experience of a war, but, wars upend women's lives just as much as they upend men's lives. And we don't see those stories being told, So it's a brilliant, brilliant time to be a woman, because the film industry has finally realized, oh, we could actually make an original film, if we put a female perspective at the heart of it. And who better to write that than a woman?
Oh,
And there are actually right now lots and lots of schemes in place. And, I met you when you were a teenager on one of them, which are to encourage young women. But I would emphasize this: women of any age. If you are a 60 or 70-year-old woman, or 80 or 90-year-old woman, and you have a story to tell, then, the world is waiting for it. And the biggest obstacles to our getting ahead is that we select out before we even access those supports that are actually there for us, and they're there in some abundance in Ireland, and we should be really grateful for that, but we're self-selecting out because of the feeling that we're not good enough. And here's the thing: maybe you're not good enough today, but maybe if you work at it, you'll get better. And then one day you'll be good enough, like, maybe I'm not good enough today, but I work at it and I'm definitely a better writer than I was 10 years ago because I'm having a bash, So we have to be prepared to fall on our faces sometimes and fail sometimes, but to keep going. Because the men are doing that, and that's how they're getting ahead as well,
Yeah, I suppose my next question would be as young female writers, it's very important to watch different work. So is there any writers in particular that their films you'd say are oh, this is really this would be great for a young person to learn from as a writer?
Well, I mean, there are some female filmmakers that I absolutely love. There's actually a not very prolific female director called Courtney Hunt. She made a film called Frozen River. I adore it. It's it's fully from the perspective of a woman. It's fully from the perspective of a dispossessed woman. But boy, is she a hero, you know. And she's not a hero because she's likable. She's a hero because she's desperate, you know. So I love Frozen River. If you're not on Mubi, I literally just joined. It's got some great movies. Another like female filmmaker that I adore is a Oregonian filmmaker called Kelly Reichardt. If you've never seen Wendy and Lucy, and I really encourage young female filmmakers, directors, producers, editors, and writers to watch these because they're also, I would say, high concept but low budget. Maybe I shouldn't even say high concept. They are relatively low budget, but they're brilliant, brilliant storytelling. And so they're incredibly gripping, you know, and these people are getting to make their films because they're not mega budget. And I think learning about that. But if you want to give yourself an education in film, you can't only watch films by women, right? Because the vast majority of films have been made by men.
Yeah.
And they've made good ones. And some of them are brilliant men who do care about the human perspective and they don't discount. But I mean, Alfred Hitchcock is like a desperate misogynist, you know, and the content of some of his films is really ropey and not just the film rope. You know, it's like ugh, like his really twisted attitudes towards women come across in some of his films. I can't watch, what's that one called? I've forgotten the name of it. There's a later one that's like, ooh, Frenzy. It's like, ooh, don't watch it. But still, if you want to learn about filmmaking, sit down and watch Hitchcock films.
Yeah.
And go, what is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? How is he doing it? How is he doing it? But I think you also you need to study your craft, you know, and young people, not just women, but men as well, tend to be like, oh, I don't want to learn my craft. I just want to express myself. I want to roam free and, you know, be brilliant. And this is a craft, you know, in the same way that like, if you wanted to be a composer, you would go to the conservatory and you would learn scales and you'd learn how to play your instrument and you'd learn which chords go with which and which sound wrong. And then like you can break all those rules afterwards once you know them all. But it is important to learn your craft. If you cannot get access to an education in film, I really recommend a podcast called The Films That Made Me. And it's a podcast by Josh Olson and Joe Dante. And what they do is they get filmmakers, and Josh Olson and Joe Dante are both straight white men of a certain age, and they're both feminists and they're really cool. And they have loads of female guests on and really interesting female filmmakers. They also have loads of male guests on, but those filmmakers will talk about the films that they fell in love with and why they think they're brilliant. And what I do is I listen to the podcast and then I go and I find as many of those films as I can and I watch them. And then I listen to the podcast again and I go, okay, I've learned something from this. And that's like, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, again, to his content, you know, but you cannot deny that he knows how to orchestrate the emotions of an audience. You know, and there's, you know, him like that story of him sitting in a video store and watching movies, you know, he educated himself by doing that. And I think, you know, the other thing is like, especially young filmmakers need to watch stuff from before their time. And you need to lean in and go, okay, this is going to be clunky. It's the 1930s, you know, so parts of it are going to be clunky, but let me see what is working. And then let me see what isn't, you know, like there's some of those, God, years ago at the Goethe Institute in Dublin, that's kind of the cultural offshoot of the German embassy. They showed all these early German expressionist films. So all those people like Fritz Lang and that. And it was such a treat. It was for free. They were just sharing their culture, you know. And I'd say there was like me and 11 other people that like went along, you know, but it was great. But it was really interesting because when they would plant something like a cat, right? And then that was going to be really important later on. And when you saw it again later on, the screen would then go, and then they would remind you of when our characters saw the cat before. They just hadn't yet learned the language of cinema and to go, it's okay. the audience will remember the cat. So it was really interesting to me to watch those 1920s films. There was also amazing artistry. I wasn't watching them for what was wrong, but it was interesting afterwards to kind of dissect what was wrong. So, I think there's no excuse, for not watching lots and lots and lots and lots of films, and especially films from before your time, and going, what in them still works? And it's okay to go, oh, some of them I don't get. A friend of mine is very funny. We were talking about Black Klansman. It wasn't my favorite, and it wasn't his favorite either. But he was saying the least credible bit was that anybody would watch Birth of a Nation for fun. The idea that like the Klansmen all get together and watch Birth of a Nation, he was like, no, that would be absolute torture. But you can, like I've seen Battleship Potemkin twice. That's loads for me, but it's still like interesting to watch things. Sorry, I'm being very long-winded, but the other thing that I really, really, really recommend for all students of film is to find a silent filmmaker that you like. So the ones that have mostly survived are the comedies, because they are still funny, right? So Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, like those are probably my go-tos. And the films, some of them are patchy, some of them are just hilarious from start to finish. Steamboat Bill Jr., I can just watch that film over and over again. But you will learn so much from watching how filmmakers communicated with audiences when they couldn't use dialogue. Dialogue is like the worst thing that happened to movies, right? But they were really an art when it was like, how can I communicate what's happening between these two people without using a title card saying, I love you, but my husband's watching? Look at the art of telling a story through images, because dialogue has to be processed through the brain, right? Whereas images just bypass all that and land up, we go, oh, and we tell the story together with the filmmaker when they show us the images, and we have to put together the meaning. So I think that's a really important thing for people to do as well. But like I say, I don't want you to look out, the most boring ones. Like find the ones that genuinely tick, like watch Laurel and Hardy. They're funny, these are funny guys, and you will like, but find the one that tickle your funny bone, which is like, what tickles your funny bone will be different to what tickles my funny bone. But I think you look at the artistry of that and learn and give yourself the exercise then of updating. I can't remember if I shared this to you, but one that I've shown to lots and lots of groups is, if you look at Steamboat Bill Jr., you'll find this on YouTube. Look up Steamboat Bill Jr. It's a Buster Keaton film, and the hat scene, right? So it's a young man right after college. So I guess he's about 22. He's come to see his father, who hasn't seen him since he was a baby. The marriage fell apart, and his mother brought him back to New York. So this guy's like, big tough guy on the Mississippi, and his son turns up and he's a little fop, he's like tiny little Buster Keaton, and the father's not a bit pleased, and the father tries to give him a makeover to make him more manly. And it's a really funny scene. But I would offer this as a creative challenge, is go, well, like in this, it's particularly just finding a hat that the father doesn't think is ridiculous, right? And there's a subtext there. The father is afraid that his son is gay. And this is something that still exists. A super macho guy wouldn't know how to relate to his son if he thought he was gay, and thinks, getting him to dress differently will change that, but like that is still something that exists, right? I mean, I did this with a group in Bow Street, and one of the students was like, oh, that happened with our neighbors. Like the daughter was getting married, and the 15-year-old son was given a couple of £100 and told, go into town and buy yourself a suit. And he came back with a flowery suit. And the dad went mad. The dad was like, what are people going to think? And our friend was going, They're going to think he's wearing a flowery suit. Like, he's just a 15-year-old. He doesn't need to look like a banker. But the dad was really, really, really threatened by the fact that the son wanted to wear something that wasn't super masculine. So I always go, like, look at those old silent movies, pick something like that, but update it by 100 years, right? And just have a battle, like, and, especially if you're young, you won't be that far from having memories of this yourself, battling with your parent over your appearance. And it doesn't have to be because your parent thinks you're gay, right? It's just you want to look a certain way and your parent wants you to look another way. You'd rather die than wear what your parent wants you to wear. Your parent holds the purse strings and is like, I'm not having you go to your cousin's wedding wearing that. You've got a really interesting scene there. But if you look at Buster Keaton, you can figure out how to tell that story visually and not all through dialogue, and then you'll have a really fun little short if you do it. But it's a fun little short that speaks to primal things like separating from family of origin and asserting your own identity in the face of maybe even a loving parent or a domineering parent, right? Yeah, sorry, very long answer.
So like it was great. Like I'm just gaining so much from today. But like I say, my last question, since we're almost at 8, would be what's the best thing about being a writer today?
Well, listen, find a way to get paid to do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, you know? Um, but like for me, I think stories are the most important thing in the world because to me, they're how we make sense of our experience, right? Like, so we take our experience and any story that you start to write, even if it just seems like a wild fantasy, that it's about magic, that it's in space, that it's, whatever, it will actually sooner or later come down to something you really care about. And it's about you figuring out how you feel about this world and how it works and where you live in it. And if you get to tell your story reasonably well, then you get to, first of all, make sense of it yourself, but then possibly connect with other human beings. Um, I told a story at the Moth. Oh, the Moth is somewhere else that I would really encourage young filmmakers to go for a story. Themoth.org. So the Moth is like competitive storytelling. And I told a story at the Moth in LA a few years ago about my father's funeral. And it took me a really long time to construct that story. I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I didn't know how to end it. And you're only given 6 minutes to tell your story. You can't, So I was blathering on for 7.5 minutes when I was trying to rehearse it, and I didn't know how to end it. But I really wanted to win. So I was running it with a friend of mine who's an actor, and I was like, I don't know. This was the day before. I was like, I don't know how to do this. And she said, you know what? Your subconscious knows how to do it. So just stop rehearsing it, stop practicing, stop doing anything like that. Just go to sleep and say a prayer to the God of your understanding, right? And she said, don't pray to win. That's not what it's about. Pray that you'll give the people what they came out for, like a really great story, and that you'll honor the story. So that's what I did. And she was like, then you'll win. But that's not your prayer. Your prayer is to honor the story and give the people what they came out for. So that's what I did. And when I woke up in the morning, I went, oh, the story's not about my father. It's not a story about my father. It's a story about my sisters. So my subconscious did the work while I was asleep. And then that morning I went, cha-chung, 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 and all the bits of the story moved around and the order in which I was giving the information moved around, but I had it. And I had to carry it then like a cup of water in my head for the rest of the day. But I didn't run it. I didn't time it. I was like, I've got it. Something has happened. And I got up on the stage and I told that story. And for the first time in 10 years, I made sense of my father's passing. But that story kind of went viral, and it'll still pop up. That was a few years ago, 4 years ago, I think, 4 years ago. Yeah, it was, because it was Donald Trump's inauguration, so that was fun. But it was around that time. But it'll still pop up somewhere, like the BBC or something like that. And like, I got a lovely email from somebody who I guess found my website, and he was like, "I'm a soldier in the British Army, but my parents were both Irish, and I buried them both in the last couple of years, and I haven't been able to cry. They both had lingering deaths, but I'm sitting at my kitchen table and I'm sobbing, because I just heard your story, and I want to thank you, because I released some of my grief, you know."
Mhm.
And that's the most important thing that I possibly could have done for me and for him. And I had the same experience. Like, I was reading Maggie O'Farrell's book Hamnet. I don't know if you've read it. It's a reimagining of, apparently Shakespeare had a son called Hamnet, Hamnet. It's an amazing book. I think she's going to be in conversation. She's going to be in conversation with somebody at the literary festival. Anyway, your your viewers can Google that. But when I read her book, it's about grief, and she released my grief, you know. So, like, what's the best thing about it? It's like we're grappling with what it means to be a human being, and we get paid to do it. You know, and you have a laugh, like, if you get to work with other people, and you get to say, well, why is this character doing this, and what's motivating her, and would she tell the truth about that, and if she wouldn't, why wouldn't she, what's she concealing, all of those things, and those things are just really, really fascinating to me. And then you get, in an ideal world, you get paid to do it, right? But if people want to hear my story, they can hear it on SoundCloud. I think you can find me on SoundCloud, and you can hear that story about my father's funeral, and then they'll get it. What I mean about, it wasn't a story. In the end, it wasn't about my father. It was about my sisters. When I working on the story and finding the story helped me to understand my own experience first,
Yeah.
and then connect with other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Because
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to see you again, and I wish you well, IADT. I'm glad that you'll get, I trust you'll get a couple of years where you actually get to be with your colleagues and get your hands on the equipment. And just to say, like, if people want to connect with me, they can find me on adramatikimprovement.com.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Aisha. I'll see you soon.
See you.
Okay. Bye.